Welcome to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast where innovation isn't just an ideal, it's a way of life. I'm your host and creator of the Innovate, Disrupt, or Die newsletter, Danny Nathan. Hello, folks, and welcome back to another episode of Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. This week, I have Robyn Bolton with me. Robyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Such a joy to be here.
Awesome. I'm really excited to dive in.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with the easy question that I ask everybody, Robyn. Tell me a bit about yourself, your background, and kind of how you got into the world of innovation.
Sure. So I feel like I've been in the world of innovation from the very beginning, which now makes me feel very, very old.
I have similar feelings and similar sensibilities, so I hear you.
So I've spent, my whole career in it, starting off with coming out of undergrad. Went to school at Miami University, the one in Ohio, not the one in Florida. And Miami is very close to P&G, which is in Cincinnati. So went to work for P&G at a time when they were investing a lot in innovation. And this is actually pre-A.G. Lafley. I think most people associate A.G. Lafley and P&G and innovation. This was actually before that. And super lucky that I just randomly got assigned to an innovation and new business development team and spent my first year out in the real world working on the development and launch of Swiffer. Totally unique experience. It was awesome. It was super fun. It definitely fit my slightly rebellious kind of anti-authority streak. It was great fun. It was hugely successful. And so I thought oh, this is normal. This happens all the time.
No.
It does not. Just spoiler alert, no. So I, kept working on Swiffer, worked on the launch of Swiffer WetJet. Then actually A.G. Lafley became CEO and killed all innovation at P&G for very good reason. The core business was not doing well. You have to pull all the resources into kind of what keeps the lights on. So made sense, but I'm like, I really love this innovation thing. So moved to Arkansas, because that's super innovative. But no, moved to Arkansas, was on P&G's Walmart sales team for a while, then moved up to Boston, got my MBA, went to work at BCG, big consulting firm, and kind of, dabbled in innovation along the way. But after a few years at BCG, actually went to go work for a firm that was founded by Clayton Christensen, the father of disruptive innovation. And so that was going all in on innovation, corporate innovation. I mean, you talk about innovate, disrupt, or die. That was my life for about 9 years and great fun. Then decided to go off on my own and found MileZero, which is the firm I have now, and continue drive the innovation, disrupt or die, while tackling a lot of the things that I think, I didn't feel like we addressed at some of my previous firms, because they're hard, they're tough topics, they're very people-oriented, they're not neatly solved by a framework or a structure. Right. And so kind of focusing on that, on the structure and the people aspect of trying to get companies to innovate.
Awesome. I have so many questions that fall out of that. Okay. I want to back up first to something you said about your time at P&G. You mentioned A.G. Lafley.
Yeah.
A.G. Lafley came in, said the core business is suffering. I'm going to shut down all innovation and pull everything together. It's kind of an interesting move, especially when you view the idea of innovation as a mechanism for future growth and longevity. Was that a decision? And I realize, or at least I think you were relatively early in your career. And so we're probably still, figuring things out and kind of learning the ropes. But I guess a better way to ask this would be, in hindsight, how do you feel about that decision? Is it, given the experience that you have now, do you think it was the right move? Or do you think that he should have, perhaps even doubled down on innovation as a mechanism for future growth trajectory?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my memory, which admittedly is flawed, I remember actually sitting in, it was a Tuesday morning, kind of our multifunctional Swiffer.
You remember down to the day of the week. Wow.
This is how vivid it was. Now, the specifics, TBD. But somebody walked in, the market had just opened, And what I remember was that P&G stock price had halved itself overnight. Now, I
Whoa.
don't know if it actually halved itself or felt like it halved itself,
Got it.
but
Okay, so there was a big drop. Whether it
there
was
was a
half remains to be seen.
huge drop. And to the point that I remember like a week later, my boss's boss came back and was like, why is everyone so sad? Like, have you seen the stock price? He's like, yeah, we had a stock split. We're like, no, we didn't have a stock split.
Wow.
So that was this big precipitating moment where P&G lost a huge amount of its value. And so something had to be done because this was like
Sure.
a near death moment.
Right. For one of the largest companies in the world.
Right. And a lot of that is because I think kind of innovation had just started to take over and everybody was more focused on like, oh, what's the next innovative brand? What's the next fun thing to do? And had taken their eye off of what are just the fundamentals that we need to do to keep the lights on, to keep the business open. So AG's decision to cut all innovation was very much kind of a life-saving effort of we need to cut all of the extraneous stuff. We need to get back to keeping our core business healthy. And because he had a longer tenure, he was still in the role like 2 or 3 years later once the business was healthy again, and he could restart innovation.
Got it. So looking back on it at least, and I obviously have no idea whether this was shared at the time or shared with somebody in your position at the time.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean that pejoratively, but
No, it's true.
so it sounds like perhaps he had his eye on the ball and there was the plan of kind of bringing the innovative mindset back into the fold after things were stabilized.
Yeah. I think that was definitely his plan. And like I said, he was lucky enough, fortunate enough to be in the CEO role long enough to bring innovation back
To
in.
actually
And
make
that's
it
really
happen.
kind of what his reputation is, you know, he made P&G innovative. So it speaks to where he spent the vast majority of his tenure was building innovation.
That's so interesting too. I mean, given what you've described about stepping into an organization that was already really excited about innovation, but then having it be credited to the guy that sort of killed it and restarted it is kind of an interesting dichotomy there.
Yep.
You know, history is always written by the victors, I
I
guess.
was gonna say, yeah, it's a part of AG's history that isn't often told of like, he came in and killed innovation.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess it's also very easy to become the guy that is innovative when you're starting from, ground zero because you've chosen to get rid of all of it in the first place. So
Right.
interesting. I don't know. Maybe that was his plan. So
There's
he
this
was just setting
evil
himself
plan
up for
all
success. Right. Exactly. Awesome. All right, Robyn, next question for you. You had the opportunity to work at, and I want to frame this carefully. You said a company founded by Clayton Christensen. Is that correct?
That is.
Was he still there? Can you tell me more about that experience? As you pointed out, sort of the godfather of all things disruptive innovation, and you had the opportunity to work tell me more. I'm both jealous and intrigued.
Yes. So Clay was always a teacher at heart. Like that.
Yes.
That was his great passion in life, was being a professor, educating students. So the multiple businesses that kind of spun out of his work were very much kind of in response to demand.
Okay.
And so the firm I worked at was kind of the first business that spun out of his work. It was just, he wrote The Innovator's Dilemma. Lots of CEOs started calling. His research assistants and teaching assistants were like, we'll return these calls for you. And then they founded a firm. It was very much a firm founded on, kind of the idea of disruptive innovation, disruptive technologies, how to make that happen in organizations. And so, but he loved teaching. So he was always kind of down the road at Harvard.
Okay.
But he would show up, once a quarter, just come in and kind of have these lunch sessions and be like, hey, here's what I'm thinking about. Here's kind of the latest thing that I'm contemplating. What do you think? And so and everybody was invited. So anyone could come to the session, anyone could speak up. And so it was very cool to kind of have that front seat to the things he was noticing and how he was thinking about stuff, oftentimes years before he ever published anything.
God, as I said, I am so jealous of the opportunity. I mean, just the idea of sitting in a room and thinking about how those conversations, at least in my head, might have unfolded. And I'm a huge fan of his work and his theories and perspectives. So
Yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah. I
sounds
will tell
amazing.
you, I have to tell you my favorite story from one of those
Oh,
sessions.
please.
So he was a magnificent storyteller. And so he was telling this story about, this is a fictional story. This gentleman dies and he goes up to heaven and, he's greeted at the pearly gates by St. Peter and is ushered in. And, so he goes into this long description of heaven. And the guy who is in heaven now is like, I've noticed, like, of all the things that are in heaven, there's one thing that's not here, and there's no numbers here. There's no data. And St. Peter's like, well, right, because numbers lie. So anyone who wants to see data can go to hell. And I just loved it for so many reasons. One, that Clay, who's like this incredibly gentle person, tell somebody to go to hell.
Yeah.
But also every time I hear somebody say in a company like, well, we need more data to make this decision, my internal monologue is like, go to hell.
Oh man, that sounds like something that would pop through my head as well. I could
Yeah.
totally appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, Robyn, tell me what did the company do? I mean, you've talked a bit about, the founding and sort of the opportunities to learn from Clayton Christensen, or at least hear his theories well ahead of time. What was sort of the purview of the company? How was it constructed? Like, what was the experience like?
Yeah. So it was, in a lot of ways, a very traditional consulting firm, kind of set up as a
Okay.
pyramid model and doing consulting. So I was there from 2008 to 2017. And what's
Wow.
interesting is that the firm, I know, the firm changed a lot. Like when I joined, it was about 20, 30 people. When I left, it was about 120 with offices in 3 countries. So where we started, the type of work we were doing was work that was very consistent kind of in that era of come in, help us create the new product. Like, let's do a brainstorming session. Let's do some design thinking, research, prototype, all of that stuff. And over time, the work the firm did evolved just as much kind of, I think, as our understanding of innovation, especially in organizations, evolved to say, like, yeah, you need to create these new businesses. And it's businesses, it's not just products. You need
Yes.
to think about it as a business model, as a solution. And you have to develop capabilities around it. And you have to think about the organizational aspects, because one day this little thing that you've nurtured is going to get handed over into the big business. And how do you make sure it doesn't die? And then getting into strategy and growth strategy. So it was just as I think that our understanding and our work on innovation broadly evolved, so did how the firm served our clients.
Sure. That's interesting, Robyn. I was working at a much smaller innovation consultancy around the same time period, and I was there for 5 years, which is my longest tenure at any company, basically. And even in that time period, I saw a similar shift in our business, without, of course, the nameplate of Clayton Christensen on the door. But we were shifting very much from kind of the birth of the mobile social era into product development and organizational change and things like that. So I understand exactly what you're describing over the course of that time period, and it sounds like you were in the thick of it for a little longer than I was there. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Very cool. What types of companies were you all working with? Was this big Fortune 500s, or were you working with smaller kind of burgeoning companies?
Yeah, the firm worked mostly with really big, like Fortune 500, Fortune
Yeah, that's what I
100
would
companies.
expect.
The companies I work with now tend to be kind of more in that mid-market, which
Mhm.
I have found is, at least for me, is so much more rewarding, because that it's so much easier to exact a change in a
Yes.
mid-market company. Not to say it's easy. It is not easy. It
It's
is
never easy, but the
it
difference between doing so in a Fortune 500 versus,
yes,
as you said, a mid-market is
it's
dramatic.
easier.
Yeah.
Yes.
Robyn, I want to refer back to something that you said during our kind of intro call, and I'm going to quote you here because it was an amazing quote that I love. You said, "Innovation isn't an idea problem, it's a leadership problem." Talk more about that, please, because that is such a fantastic statement.
Yeah, that is lessons learned over time and the hard
Yeah.
way. So often executives are kind of like, why don't we have innovation? Why don't we have new ideas? We have an idea problem. We need more ideas. And the fact is, people are full of ideas, and
Yes.
corporations are full of people. Therefore, by the transitive property that I learned sometime in junior high math, organizations are full of ideas.
Yes.
The ideas just aren't getting shared. And why is that? Sometimes it's because people hold back. They're like, this isn't my role. This isn't my job. There are also a lot of times where, the culture gets in the way. Managers get in the way, or managers a lot of times trying to be helpful or saying like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Go talk to so-and-so. And then you kind of get the runaround and you get busy with other things. So that's a little bit of the leadership component. The bigger leadership component is when you think about, definitely kind of at the top tier levels of a company, leaders talk a lot about innovation and they don't do a lot. Like there's a lot of talk and not a lot of walk.
Which is
And
why you and I have jobs.
yes. And, on one hand, it's extraordinarily frustrating because I'm like, if you're going to stand up there and say one of our top 3 priorities for this year is innovation, do something about that. And I also understand that, especially in big public companies, like you're measured quarterly by the
Yes.
street. And you have to deliver in the short term, and you're rewarded for short term.
Yes.
Like you have to hit your KPIs for the quarter. You have to hit your KPIs for the year. Your bonus is dependent on delivering the year, your promotion, in some ways your career. So everything is about the short term. And so if I, as an executive, am sitting there and someone's like, hey, we have this new idea and we need, obviously make this up, we need one person to work on it full time and we need $100,000. And then somebody else comes and says, hey, we need to upgrade this machine and we need one person full time, $100,000. I know what my ROI is.
Yeah.
And what my time return on the machine is. I don't know if I'll ever get anything from this innovation. So the logical choice is to go with the sure thing.
Yes.
And so you need, as a leader, like you almost have to do the opposite of your instincts. You almost have to work against yourself to throw support behind innovation.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to stop you for 1 second, Robyn, because
Yeah.
you're hitting on a bunch of great points here. And one of which is just sort of the intrinsic truth that companies are built to find and maintain stability and to hit the short-term metrics, the quarterly goals, as you're describing. And, that is directly at odds with the idea of innovation over the long term, experimentation, as you pointed out, that may not pay off for quarters or even years in some cases. How do you go about, when you're engaged with a client, helping them understand the dynamics that you're describing now and then encouraging them to look past the sort of quarterly goals moment so that they can hopefully see or discover the value in that longer term innovation?
Yeah. So it's really about being very clear up front of this is going to take time to see the results you need. I remember sitting in the office of, we're at a big food and beverage company, talking to the CEO. They just stood up a team that I had 3 full-time people and the consultants. And the CEO is like, okay, great. Here's your mandate. We need a $250 million business in 3 years at steady state. And I burst out laughing. Usually I'm able to control myself. In that moment, I was not. And I burst out laughing and, quickly apologized. And I said, with all due respect, I said, if we could do that, I would not be sitting here. I would be doing that.
Yeah.
Like, what business has ever gone from literally nothing, like a blank piece of paper, to 250 million scaled steady state in 3 years? None. So that's just not a reasonable expectation to have. And if that's what the business needs, that's fine. You need a different way to achieve that goal. Like we're talking M&A. We're not talking organic creation of a new business. And
So how did he react to being laughed at in the room? Because I'm curious.
Much more smoothly than I did in the moment. And it's like, oh, oh, that's an excellent point. Yes, it's, we have to, you're right. We have to think about it more broadly as a portfolio and all that. I'm like, okay, great. Um, so versus setting expectations more professionally than I did in that moment. Um, the other thing is you do have to show results.
Mhm.
So you can't just kind of say, great, like we have this mandate. You understand this is long term. We'll see you in 5 years.
Right.
No. So you have to be producing results. And there's research that came out a couple years ago that said that 90% of innovation teams are shut down within 3 years.
Okay.
And so if you think of like, okay, I have 3 years to get results. I'm not going to get 250 million, but can I be generating revenue? Can I have a profitable business in 3 years, even if it's at a really small scale? Because that's something, you know, that's tangible, that's money. So you kind of have 1 year to really get things up and running and going and testing and all that. Year two, you have to start showing results, even if those results are more qualitative things like, here's learning we've passed along to the
Yeah.
organization, and this existing brand has been able to use it in this way. So showing results that you are making progress and ideally getting like some quick wins that matter to your key stakeholders, but you're still on a path to some amount of revenue and profit by the end of year three.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great point, Robyn. How do you encourage companies as if you're sitting at day one or month one of that sort of 3-year trajectory, how do you go about framing the milestones and the KPIs, for lack of better terms, or whatever you want to call them? But like, what are the proof points that you set out on day one to go, okay, if in 6 months we haven't achieved X, we're not going to continue funding this effort, for example, or we know we need to shift direction and ask a different question, or whatever it is. Like, how do you go about setting up the expectations over time that you're going to deliver results, but that those results are not going to be a $250 million business tomorrow?
Yeah. I always think of it in two buckets. So like one is, what are the quick wins? So what are the things that are causing pain right now
Yeah.
for the leaders and the stakeholders? And often those things are like so far outside the purview of an innovation team, but you can like, if you can solve them, that will buy you a ton of time. So for
Right.
example, I worked with a client who, running an innovation team, but employee survey came out and found, and I'm not exaggerating this, the people across the organization were spending 40 hours a week in meetings.
Okay. Keep going,
So,
please, but I'll tell you why I'm cracking up at that.
so if you're asking when did any work get done, that was evenings and weekends. And this is a company that prided itself on work-life balance. So, right. So obviously this finding, huge deal. Is this the innovation team's problem? No, it's not. But she had one person on her team start working using all the tools of innovation,
Hmm.
all the innovation mindset to be like, how do we change this? And running experiments with small teams, changing, working with teams to change what they did so that after 3 months, they could actually point to a business unit that had cut the time in meetings in half.
That's great.
And so, that made all the stakeholders like, oh my gosh, this stuff works. And then you could say like, yeah, and we're using the tools for this and see. And so you've solved a pain point right away and you've showed that the tools work.
Yeah.
So there's kind of that one bundle of like, okay, we need some quick wins. The other is then saying, all right, let's work backwards from whatever our somewhat reasonable goal is to think about what is the portfolio of projects we have to work on. And, usually it takes about 3 months to figure out what that portfolio should even look like.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I mean, we're talking about a 3-year time span. You mentioned that by year 2, you need to be showing profitability, but that my question then falls out of it is great. So in year 1, not only do you have to get to the point where you've set yourself up for profitability, but that's assuming that you know what that hell,
Yeah.
pardon me, you're supposed to be doing in
Yeah.
the first place. And that doesn't really leave a ton of time for things like customer discovery and determination of what exactly that problem is. So
Yep.
I guess, my next obvious question, Robyn. How do you go about that? Do you have, I don't know, what are your like super secret tricks for discovering what that portfolio should look like so that you have the opportunity to become profitable in year two?
Yeah, it's put simply, it's and not or. And what I mean by that is you have to do a lot of things all at the same time.
Yeah.
So, customer discovery, customers are internal and external.
Yeah.
So go around, go talk to kind of all the key decision makers, all the key stakeholders in your organization, all the P&L owners, understand what their pain points are, what they're looking at. Because if you can plug in and help the existing business, again, that buys you time. And that's going
Okay.
to, you'll be able to, I don't want to say lay claim, but be associated with results that they're going to get much
Credibility.
quicker.
You build credibility for your efforts.
Exactly. So you're talking to them, and, every company has a sense of this is who our target customer is. This is who our
Sure.
target market is. So go out and just start do the needs finding, figure out their important and unsatisfied jobs to be done. That's going to start, bringing ideas into the pipeline. And now you're collecting ideas and you're figuring out kind of like, all right, in terms of just, you can think about like in horizons.
Mhm.
What do we have going on in Horizon 1, which is helping the core business? What do we have going on where we have maybe adjacent innovation? So we found these needs in our customers and we can repurpose some products, or we found some potential new customers for existing products. And so we've got this kind of Horizon 2 adjacent. And then what do we need to create from scratch that is truly the long-term investment? And you got to be doing all of that kind of
Yeah.
at the same time, which is hard.
Yeah, it's a lot to juggle. But yes, I agree completely. How do you then, Robyn, layer in sort of the opportunity to discover, I'm going to say opportunity again because I can't think of a better word in the moment. How do you go about discovering the opportunity for truly disruptive developments that perhaps are disruptive because they serve a target market that doesn't seemingly fit that kind of ICP that the company has defined? And then how do you go about bringing that internally and convincing people that there's a reason to go after that?
Yeah. So my thinking on this has shifted a lot over the years
Okay.
because, as you can imagine, working with Clay Christensen, it was all about like, how do we help companies disrupt themselves?
Yes.
I'm going to say this because I do believe it, but it's scary. I don't think big companies can disrupt themselves.
I've written a post with like that title.
Yes. I think they are so, rightfully so, for all sorts of good reasons, interested in self-preservation, and disruption is a threat. However, that doesn't mean that disruption isn't going to happen.
Right.
They just can't do it to themselves. So what that means now, and it's kind of great that the external world is enabling this so that you don't have to disrupt yourself as a big company, is all of the startups and the startup ecosystems, the joint ventures, corporate venture capital,
Oh, I'm so glad you're
open
going there.
innovation, all of that stuff where, a company needs to be tapped into this highly innovative, fast moving ecosystem. And so when the disruption occurs, they're ready. They're not starting it because they can't, because they'll kill it,
Right.
because it's a threat.
Right. Interesting. So I'm so glad you brought up corporate venture capital, especially sort of through the lens of that idea of disruption. Do you have experience helping companies put together CVC efforts? And, what is your take on that? Like, I think that I, I've seen a lot of discussions that say that corporate venture capital efforts sort of ebb and flow, and that,
Mhm.
for a while it was really big and then it got small again over the last, I don't know, 15 years. And some people are arguing that we're starting to kind of see an uptick in it again. Like, what's your take on that space?
I think it is an incredibly valuable tool if you're honest with yourself.
Yes.
And so I think, yes, it totally, like CVC, like so many other things, just ebb and flow. They have their moment in the sun and then another shiny object comes along. I think a lot of companies went into corporate venture capital saying the right thing, saying this is a strategic investment. We are here to help the startups, bring them customer, all the right things. And the reality was they're like, ooh, venture capital. We're going to get 100x returns in a
Right.
year, in 2 years. And so while they said this is a strategic investment, it was actually a financial investment. And when the financial investment didn't pay out at the scale and time frame they thought it would, then it faded.
Yes.
So the companies I've seen who, again, have walked the talk and have said this is a strategic investment and treated it as such tend to get the returns because, again, they stay in it for the long haul.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I had a thought there and I'm totally losing it. It'll come back. Bear with me. You were saying, Robyn, the sort of strategic investment angle is focused on helping the startups and focused on sort of growing the ecosystem. Do you really think that a lot of companies approach it with that mentality, or at least with that pure of a mentality?
No.
Okay.
I think they think like, oh, this is a cheap way to get a disruptive business. But they know that like, oh, I have to also bring something to the table to
Right.
help the startups. So, but they do expect to get something from it, as they should. If
Sure.
they are making they should get a return on it. I think what hamstrings a lot of companies, even the ones who are very sincere in their desire to make strategic investments, is the time frame that startups live on versus corporates is
Yeah.
so different that like
Yes.
it explodes people's minds.
Yeah.
The difference.
Yeah. And you're pointing right back at what we discussed a few moments ago around, the idea of quarterly goals and quarterly returns as compared to, even startups, which we talk about moving quickly, take years to develop to the point where that return is going to rear its head if it does. And
Yeah.
I think that a lot of companies also don't realize how many bets they have to make in order to get the one return that pays for the portfolio in the same manner that, a venture capital firm would.
Right. Right. They look at the
So,
numbers and I've heard them say this, oh, but we know more. The venture capitalists are generalists. We are experts. We can place fewer bets because we know more. And the challenge is that, and I have seen this happen time and time again, is big company will talk to little tiny startup, like little bootstrap startup.
yeah.
And which will be very cheap to acquire because it is little tiny bootstrap startup. But that's a much higher risk investment. Even if it's a small amount of money, much higher risk.
Yes.
And the company will be like, okay, great. Like, let's meet again. And the startup's saying like, great, let's meet next week. And the company's like, we can all get together in 3 months. And the startup's like, we may not exist in 3 months.
Right. Exactly.
And then you fast forward, let's say the startup's super successful. And again, I have literally seen this happen. Now they have something on the market. They're cash flow positive. Like they are a legit business. And the company comes back in and is like, hey, it's been great being in touch with you. We'd love to acquire you or make a significant investment. But they're still thinking of the little tiny baby startup.
Right.
And it's like, oh, no, 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 no. You don't get
Yeah.
to pay that price
Yeah.
for this
Add a couple
business.
of zeros to the number that we talked about the first time and we might be
Right.
interested.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we have taken on all the risk and spent all the money to get here. So now you're paying. And so it's just this kind of like, I use the analogy of you have the corporates on one side, you have the startups on another bank. There's a river in between and they're both building a bridge, but nobody checked to make sure the bridges are going to actually match.
Yes. Yeah.
Yep.
I always think in terms of a similar kind of metaphor of like being on either side of a teeter-totter and, trying to find that balance point. So
Yep.
yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Robyn, I want to circle back to something else that you mentioned a few minutes ago, and that's kind of the big C word. I talk a lot about the culture of innovation, and I can hear in the way that you're talking sort of the undertones of similar ideas. Talk to me a little bit about what culture of innovation means to you and how you go about encouraging companies to think in that manner and to build their own culture of innovation.
Yeah. Oh, culture of innovation. It is such a hard topic to get right. I'm not even sure that's the right phrase, but because culture, I actually had to do a lot of research into this and a lot of reading into it as I wrote my book. But essentially, culture is the shared belief based on behaviors that have been observed. And so when companies call up, as they do, and say, hey, we need to build a culture of innovation, like, great. Do you have 5 years to consistently exhibit
Yes.
changed behaviors in how you interact with people? And they're like, we were thinking more of a hackathon. It's like, innovation is not an event. And
Right.
culture is absolutely not an event. You can use an event to kick it off and to start it and to role model it. But if you are not consistently role modeling, a learner's mindset, how to ask open-ended, curious questions, if you are not rewarding smart risk-taking, if you are
Hmm.
not reframing failure as learning, if you are not doing these everyday activities, every interaction moments, you're not going to have a culture of innovation. You can have a
Right.
culture of innovation in parts, but you're not going to have a corporate culture of innovation.
Interesting. Uh, what kind of reaction do you usually see to that? I mean, so somebody comes to you and says, "We need your help building a culture of innovation, Robyn," and you say, "Great, it's going to take 5 years," and they go, "We want to do a hackathon." How
Yeah.
do you bridge the gap? I mean, there's an obvious, disconnect between we want to
Yes.
hold an event and the reality of it takes years and consistent change or consistency in actions, activities, whatever, to kind
Everything.
of build that culture. How do you help people get from one point to the other?
Yeah. It's asking questions, honestly. Often, they say, we want to build a culture of innovation. I'm like, great, tell me more about that.
Yeah, the "what does that
And
mean to you" moment.
what does that mean to you? And they're like, oh, we want a hackathon. I'm like, interesting. Why a hackathon? And so it's through this questioning to get to, like, what actually are you trying to get to?
Right.
And, a lot of times, you know, what they're trying to do is not a hackathon. It's just that's the language they
Yeah.
have. That's the thing they know about. And so it's kind of like, okay, well, this is how to get to what you want. It's also, if someone's really doubling down and saying, no, we have to do a hackathon. It's like, okay, well, here's how we set up a hackathon to be successful, because what too often happens when you have an event is everybody believes everything you're saying about the event. And everyone's super excited and they are bought in and they're like, yes, we're going to have a hackathon and someone's going to win the Shark Tank and they're going to get funding and it's going to be great. And we all believe. And then the event ends and everything goes back to the
Nothing
way it
happens.
was. And now you have lost credibility. You have lost your people's trust. And if this happens again, you have built cynics, which is the worst thing you can have in your culture. So how do we, if you're hell-bent on having an event, how do we design it to minimize the risk of that?
Interesting. I mean, I absolutely understand where you're coming from. At the same time, how do you create an event that minimizes that kind of risk, but then still has tangible impact in terms of providing a starting point for building the type of culture that, you've described, a learning culture, a failure culture, et cetera?
Yeah, it starts kind of on both ends of thinking about the event of like, what are you willing to do after the event to bring the ideas to life?
Mhm.
And if the answer is nothing,
Don't start.
then you set the event up in a very different way than, we're willing to let people work part-time or we're willing to let people work full-time.
Right.
It also informs kind of, I think too often events have like, come with your ideas. We want to hear your ideas. And that just, you're going to get too much. It's going to be too all over the place.
Yeah.
And so often in leadership, I hear they're like, those are really cool ideas. None of them matter. And so like, give people guidance on like,
Yes.
here are the problems we're trying to solve. If we're coming up with new business ideas, it has to be a business that can be this big. Like, give them constraints because creativity thrives in constraints.
Yes.
And then you're more likely to get something meaningful out of it. And again, if you don't want to support or do or change anything after the event, how can you have something that can be solved in 3 days or an afternoon?
If somebody says to you, Robyn, we're not willing to do anything to support this after the event,
Mhm.
how inclined are you to take on the project of helping them get through the event. I mean, at some point you look at it and go, I don't know. I feel like you become an event planner.
Right.
It's like, well, okay, cool, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just a masochist. In fact, it's probably very true that I'm a masochist. But in the conversation, you can tell it is someone checking a box, or are they really just trying to do the best they can with the mandate
With
they've
what
been
they have.
given and the resources they have. And so there is a genuine desire to do the right thing. And if there's a genuine desire to do the right thing, they just feel very, very constrained, then I'm happy to take it on because I'd rather do that and help them create the best experience they can to
Yeah.
get the best results than kind of send them off into the wilds to someone who's just going to kind of take their money and be like, great, have a
Yeah,
hackathon.
that's fair. And that's an interesting distinction too, because I guess it comes down to intention or mindset
Hmm.
around, all right, I understand that I mean, to your point, I understand that you have constraints in your ability to act on the mandate to be innovative or whatever that
Hmm.
mandate is. But if they genuinely want to do the best they can within that constraint, then you can see where there's value and where perhaps there is room for growth if it goes
Hmm.
well versus the alternative of, no, we're just sort of doing the thing.
Yeah.
Then yeah,
Yeah.
I get
And,
that.
there's always the risk that, it goes well and still nothing happens. But,
Sure.
you know, you've at least kind of created the opportunity to help educate kind of the people higher up the
Yeah.
ladder of like, hey, you've asked for this, we're doing it. But, to have those conversations to just help spread a better understanding
Right. Right. Absolutely. Interesting. Robyn, you and I could go on all day,
forever.
I'm quite
Yes.
sure. I have one more, I guess, sort of big question for you, and then I'll
All
I'll
right.
wrap up with a couple of little ones. But you said during our intro call that you think 2025 has been the single hardest year in the innovation space ever. That's a big statement. Why? What has changed or what is different this year that you think has created a level of difficulty that, I mean, in your words, is roughly unprecedented?
Yeah. I think is the uncertainty. Kind of big headline uncertainty. And innovation has always had ebbs and flows. Often it's just tied to the economic climate.
Sure.
In good economic times, we're all innovating, and bad economic times, kind of going back to the
Yeah.
story in the beginning of P&G, like bad economy, bad economic standing in the company, you go back to your core. What's going on now that is different than in the past is there is no solid ground at this moment. And for example, in the past, okay, yeah, the stock market can crash, but we also know kind of what the economic policies are of the administration.
Got
And
it.
we kind of know how everything in the world is fitting together and who's getting along and who's not and how stable things are. There were pieces of solid ground. There were footholds, there were toeholds that you could hold on to and be like, this is chaos, but this is solid.
Yeah.
And we don't have that right now. And so that is leading a lot of people to run to safety
Hmm.
and conserve their resources. And then on top of everything, we have this technology called AI that is disrupting everything in a way that most of us have not seen. We haven't seen in our lifetime. Like,
Right.
again, I am old enough to remember the internet coming out. I'm ancient.
The internet.
The internet coming out. But even like, and that was a seismic change, but it didn't feel nearly as seismic as the promise of AI. And so we are all like in fight, flight, or freeze. And most of us go to freeze and we go to self preservation. And so innovation is inherently risky, it's inherently
Yes.
uncertain. So when you're trying to stay safe, you're not like, hey, and let me go spend money on something I know nothing about. And thus, 2025, the worst year ever for innovation.
Got it. Robyn, that brings to mind a question that kind of circles back to our original PNG chat. I'm just curious what your take is. There are some that there are obviously many people that when you hit a time of uncertainty or difficulty, default to either freeze or sort of batten down the hatches kind of
Yeah.
mentality. There's also an argument to be made that when things are uncertain, figuring out how to develop whatever might be next is arguably the best move that you could possibly make.
Mhm.
Which camp do you fall into and why?
this will shock you. I fall into the second camp that in times of great uncertainty, you need to be experimenting and
Yeah.
testing and trying to build the next new thing. And I actually heard a stat yesterday that, because this is always kind of the mantra in, the academic or, HBR or whatever, that in downturns, companies that invest in growth emerge stronger after
Right.
the downturn. And one of the professors at Harvard actually did the research and found that only 9% of, I think, Fortune 500 companies actually follow that advice.
Yes.
The other 91% are like, that's great. We're conserving
We're going to
cash.
batten down the hatches.
So it's one of those things that, like, yes, all the evidence is there that you should invest in growth, that you should be experimenting. And we're also humans.
Yeah. Change is
And
scary, no matter what.
change is scary. Change is especially scary when you don't know what the change is. And so I heard this great quote that lean is the enemy of learning. Because learning is inherently wasteful. You are
Yes.
going to do things that don't work out. That creates
Yes.
waste. And so when you're conserving, you're trying to run lean. Lean is the enemy of learning.
Got it. I've worked in product for far too long, and my brain, when you say the word lean, goes to lean methodology and not, lean times, if
Yeah.
you will. But yes, that's a great point. Awesome. Robyn, I've really enjoyed our conversation. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you are dying to share that you think would put a really good cap on our conversation here?
That is a great question. So
It's one of my favorites.
I know the what else should I have asked question. I would say I kind of always go back to, like, great, so what do we do? Like, we're in this situation.
Right.
We're in this muck. What do we do? And I think it's about not try to be brave. And what I mean by that is, bravery, courage is not the absence of fear, is making progress through fear. And so, example, talking about AI. A lot of people are scared that AI is going to come for their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe it will, maybe it won't, but it's a real fear. I get it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't, kind of open up ChatGPT when you're at home and be like, hey, I have these ingredients in my kitchen. What can I make? Like,
Yeah.
take the little experiments that feel safer and run those. Expose yourself to ways of learning and experimenting and trying something new that feels comfortable as possible. So don't ignore the change. Find ways to engage in it.
Yeah, understand the change. And I love that you frame that kind of through somebody's personal life. It's not, where can I crack open ChatGPT at work and have to worry about whether I'm allowed to or what kind of data I pass it or anything like that, but do it at home with something as innocuous as dinner so that you can start to interact and understand. I think that's a great piece of advice. Fantastic. Robyn, for folks that want to learn more about you, get in touch, keep up with your newsletter, read your book, where should they go and find you?
Yes. So you can find me at my firm's website, which is MileZero.io. And that's the zero spelled out, ZERO. Or connect with me on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect there.
Awesome. And what is the name of your book in case people want to grab that?
Thank you. So the name of the book is Unlocking Innovation, A Leader's Guide to Turning Bold Ideas into Tangible Results. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the places that you can find a book. You can also go to my website. There's a page there.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on a copy. Anything that has innovation in the title ends up on my shelf as far as I'm concerned. So I'm looking forward to it. Awesome. Robyn, it has absolutely been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. This has been awesome.
That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to Innovate, Disrupt, or Die, the podcast. Join us again for our next episode. And don't forget to subscribe at innovatedisruptordie.com. That's all, folks.